And welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Mike Bosak's our guest. Whenever Mike's in, we talk about Landmark Society of Greater Utica because Mike is a long-time member of Landmark. So we're going to talk about landmarks a little bit later on in the show, but we're going to talk a little bit about another topic, a topic that we haven't ever talked about with Mike on air, and that's Mohawk Airlines. You're a Mohawk Airlines aficionado, yes?
Among other things, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Good.
Yes, I was always a Mohawk fan. I know that you were for many, many years and all. And back in the day when I was a kid, I would drag my father into the airport to watch the planes take off and land all the time.
I did the same thing and stood behind the fence up there at Utica County Airport and watched the planes land, take off. And my first ever ride on an airplane was a Mohawk airplane. It was a Convair 440.
So was mine.
Yeah.
It was a BAC 111. It was, I think it was November of 1966 or so. Flew to Newark with my cousins. My cousin actually worked for Mohawk Airlines. Flew to Newark and back on a Convair CV 240 and all the Cosmopolitans.
Yep. Yeah. And you were telling me before the show, Mike, that this is an anniversary of sorts for Mohawk because it was in June of 1965 that they got their BAC 111 jets.
Their first one went into service in June of 1965, 54 years ago, and that's quite a thing to think about.
And I've got one right in front of me here that you were nice enough to bring in, a BAC 111. And one of the things about the Mohawk fleet was, and this was back when they were flying propeller DC-3s. Sure. And then they moved up to the Convairs and the Martin, and then ultimately Fairchild turboprops and this BAC 111. They're all named after Indians.
They are. That's right.
Yeah, they took that Mohawk theme right throughout the airline, Mike.
Right. They were Robinson Airlines until about 1952, and then Robert Peach took a controlling interest, and the board changed the name from Robinson to Mohawk, and they used that Mohawk Indian theme throughout. Air Chief, Onondaga, and they had tons of them.
As long as we're talking about the names of airplanes, I'm looking at the N number on this airplane, and I'll have to look it up and see which one this is modeled after. But all of them were named, the propeller-driven airplanes were named. Then when they got to the BAC 111, they named them after states.
Or cities, yes.
Or cities.
Yes, yeah. Oneonta and all, I do remember that.
Michigan, and I remember they had one named Pennsylvania, the governor of Pennsylvania christened the plane, and then Happy Rockefeller christened the BAC 111 that was named after New York State.
Sure.
Yeah. I've often wondered why they adapted the Indian theme with the airline when Bob Peach took over. Any thoughts about that?
Well, because of the Mohawk name, you know, it was an homage, I think, to the Indians and all. Remember at the time, Oneida National Bank had a big Indian theme as well.
That's right. Yeah. The airline itself was people that are younger than us might be surprised at how big that airline got.
It really was.
Yeah.
It was one of the biggest regional airlines that there were, and it was the first one to fly jets. And by 1969, they'd gotten rid of all their propeller-driven craft. They did have the Fairchild FH-227, which was a turboprop, and they had somewhere around the neighborhood of 43 planes, I believe.
Yeah, and geez, they went into states up and down the East Coast and into Canada, Washington, D.C. They had a good route structure.
I remember going to the airport, and they would have that map behind the counter, and just looking at that in awe, just all the places that they went. It was amazing.
Someone I know who worked for, and maybe we can talk about this, the family tree that Mohawk engendered after a while, how the whole thing went, the genealogy of the airline. He was up there when they were throwing out all kinds of stuff. You and I would have gone crazy in that junk pile, but he got that big sign that you talked about.
Yes.
Yep.
That was huge.
Yeah. I don't know whatever happened to it, but I know he had it in his garage. So we had Robinson Airlines, which became Mohawk, and then Mohawk got gobbled up.
Unfortunately, yes, because of strikes and other financial problems and all, they were swallowed up by Allegheny in 1972.
and then Allegheny became US Air, and then US Air got absorbed by
It was U.S. Airways and then
yeah,
eventually by American Airlines.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I was on a US Airways plane once, and they were celebrating an anniversary, and as you came off the jetway onto the plane, they had the symbols for the airlines that made up US. There was no Mohawk. That's kind of,
That's too bad, yes.
Yeah. The Bob Peach was the hard driving executive that really expanded that airline from, well, they started off with a single engine airplane that carried 3 passengers and a pilot, one route to New York City when it was Robinson, and he got it to where it was.
Actually, yes, when the transition came about in 1952, they borrowed money to get 3 used DC-3s.
War surplus.
Right, and then eventually went to the Convairs. Convairs were one of the first commercial airlines that were pressurized, so that was a big deal back in the day, you know. And then eventually they went to the BAC 111. In fact, they sent an entourage when the 111 was not even built yet in 1962 to England, to the plant there, and they were looking at the various options and all that. And Mohawk was was the first to fly the particular model. The first production model was a BAC 111-200. American Airlines had a few 400s. They were much longer.
Yeah. One of the things I remember about the BAC 111 is they had the ramp in the back.
Yes.
That you could come in and out of the plane.
Actually, the Convairs did as well. I always thought that was a pretty unique feature, and people nowadays wouldn't even know what we're talking about. But
yeah.
the back end of the plane was actually an alternate escape route or a jetway or a stairway.
Entry, yeah.
So people would get in and out that way too.
Good. We're going to take a quick break. Mike Bosak's our guest. We're talking a little bit about Mohawk Airlines. We'll do a little bit more of that, and we'll talk about landmarks and maybe even a little bit about Union Station. Short break, right back.